The same year that Ivor Noel Hume's classic volume, Historical Archaeology, was published in 1969, Mary Carolyn Beaudry entered the College of William and Mary as a freshman. Among many lessons that Noel Hume's book was recommending for nascent archaeologists, the one most often remembered is that women, with their low necklines, high heels, and sensitivity to cursing, were best relegated to the pot-washing shed. Meanwhile, less than a mile away, one of the most important thinkers in American historical archaeology was busy getting ready for her first college classes. There may be no better metaphor for the changes a-comin' in American historical archaeology than the juxtaposition of these two events, both centered on the same town and, from a 21st century perspective, involving two of the field's titans. It was as an undergraduate that Mary Beaudry took her first steps as an archaeologist, taking an elective course in archaeology from Norm Barca, and then volunteering with him at Maycock's plantation. Excited by what she experienced, the English major changed direction, and by the time she graduated from William and Mary with a BA degree in 1973, she already had several field seasons under her belt in the Virginia Chesapeake. Even as she worked on her PhD at Brown, Mary continued to work in Virginia until 1981, when she began a focus on sites in Massachusetts, closer to her new teaching job at Boston University. Mary was largely silent on what we are calling her lost Virginia years. We were her students during those years, and we could already see the impact she was having on the field, on us, at that early date. In this paper, we commemorate this early part of her career and explore why she may have been silent about these years. We conclude that, while she did not talk much about them, those years were critically formative for her development, not just as an archaeologist, but as a mentor. Mary became the mentor she rarely had, and all of us in this room are the beneficiaries of what she learned from her early experience in the Chesapeake. As an undergraduate, Mary worked on several projects for Norm Barca and Ted Reinhardt, both of whom were teaching at that time at William and Mary. Mary served on Barca's field crew at the Poor Potter's Kiln site in Yorktown in the summer of 1972. Later that year and in 1973, she was a lab assistant for Barca, processing artifacts from Flowerdew 100 on the James River near Hopewell, Virginia. She also gained survey experience at Kings Mill Plantation, locating pre-contact sites along the James River. After graduating from William and Mary in 1973, she spent the summer working at the Yorktown battlefield on the Grand Battery project. Mary departed Virginia in the fall of 1973 for Brown University, where she would spend the next 7 years as a graduate student with Jim Dietz. Mary received her MA from Brown in 1975 and her PhD in 1980. She worked on projects in the Northeast, but her heart, at least during this time, remained in Virginia, and she was back in the Commonwealth by 1975. That year, Mary was not just working on projects, she was leading them, first as director of the Mulberry Island Survey at Fort Eustis, and then as field director for a survey of Fort A.P. Hill in Bowling Green in 1977 and 1978. During the summer of 1978, she served as a supervisor on William and Mary's first archaeological field school at Flowerdew 100, overseeing student excavators at the ferry landing site. She returned to William and Mary in 1979, this time assisting Ted Reinhardt with field school students at Shirley Plantation. In the summers of 1979 to 1982, Mary ran a field project for the Brunswick County Historical Society on the early 18th century site of Fort Christiana, following on earlier survey work done by Dave Hazard and Martha McCartney from the Virginia Research Center for Archaeology. Located in Brunswick County in southern Virginia near the North Carolina border, Fort Christiana was established in 1714 by Alexander Spotswood, Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, to protect the border area from indigenous groups hostile to Virginia. In true colonizing tradition, plans were made to resettle several indigenous groups near the fort for protection by the 12 rangers stationed there. Acting as a buffer and essentially as a reservation, the fort served as a fur trading post and was also the location of an Indian school funded by the Virginia Indian Company. Mary published a paper in the Conference on Historic Site Archaeology Papers, 1979, on this work, where she tested the archaeological findings from Fort Christanna against Stanley South's frontier artifact pattern and Michael Forsman's early fur trade artifact pattern. This, by the way, was her 4th article in a refereed journal. In Sarah Masha and Carolyn White's essay on the occasion of Mary receiving the SHA's J.C. Harrington Award, they noted that, in true Knoll-Humean fashion, female students at Brown were often assigned archival work while male students went off to dig. Mary had an edge using documents because of work she had previously done for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation on the York County Records Project, certainly one of the most ambitious records abstracting projects undertaken in its day. The work with documents, especially probate inventories, shaped Mary's research for years and indeed allowed her to theorize the role of documents in the field in new and fresh ways. The very first paper Mary gave at an SHA meeting in 1975 in Charleston, South Carolina, concerned pots and Virginia probate inventories. By 1982, the year Mary led a slate of co-authors to the publication of the influential co-authored Potts article in Historical Archaeology, Mary had completed her dissertation, published articles in the Conference on Historical Sites Archaeology and the Quarterly Bulletin of the Archaeological Society of Virginia, and presented her findings at SHA and the American Anthropological Association meeting. Meanwhile, she found time to complete site reports. By the time Mary was 30 in 1980, she had broken through many glass ceilings in Virginia archaeology, laying groundwork not only for her own research, but for those who would come behind her. So why don't we hear about those years? The answer, we think, lies in the very real shadow that a male-dominated field, at least at that time, cast over how well, or not so well, women would be welcomed into its ranks, especially in the Chesapeake, where a pretty important person had basically said, "Women belong in the pot washing shed." We met Mary in the summer of 1978 when we enrolled in the William and Mary Field School at Flower 200 Plantation, and when Mary was already blazing her trail. To us, Mary was the epitome of a cool female archaeologist, a role model who not only empowered us to believe that we could have careers in archaeology, she acted as if we already had careers. She was intelligent, savvy, funny, outspoken, and beautiful. A woman not afraid to get dirty or to work hard at the manual labor required by our profession, or to dress up in party clothes, or even don a bikini and ham for the cameras in the process. Mary was a feminist at a time when it was not particularly easy to be a feminist, especially at a conservative school like William and Mary, and in a conservative field like Chesapeake Historical Archaeology. The 1970s were particularly challenging for Mary as a young female archaeologist. As intimated in Knoll-Hume's book, women were held to a higher and different standard than their male colleagues. Women were few and far between on field crews. Kathy Deegan has talked about how, during these years, she was forced to use legal remedies against a fairly big name in the field when he turned her down for a field position. Looking at field photos from some of the projects Mary was involved with during the 1970s, it is apparent that she was often one of the few females on the crews. That is why it is so telling that the photographs of the field crews from Fort Christanna, the first projects Mary ran independently of Reinhardt or Barca, contain almost equal numbers of men and women. Archaeological project records from the late 1970s indicate that Mary faced a number of challenges, some perhaps because of her effort to push through glass ceilings. Mary was clearly held to a higher standard of work than other crew chiefs, expected to produce site reports and other written materials without financial compensation. There were instances in which her authority was overridden at the site she was directing, with work being done without her permission or knowledge. In one case, there was even a threat of professional retaliation against her. Despite having a master's degree and well advanced toward her doctorate in 1978, Mary's compensation for teaching that year's William and Mary Field School was minimum wage, $2.65 an hour. However difficult Mary's years in Virginia might have been, they certainly shaped the archaeologist that she was to become. Her work on 17th and 18th century Chesapeake sites provided a firm foundation for understanding similar time periods in the Northeast. The emphasis at William and Mary on material culture and how to analyze and interpret artifacts was something Mary excelled at early on. During one of the Shirley Field School sessions, Mary gave the students a lecture on 17th, 18th, and 19th century ceramics, causing Ted Reinhardt to remark in the field log, quote, "What a remarkable grasp she has of this material," end quote. This training and interest stood Mary in good stead for the entirety of her career, leading to such publications as Findings, the Material Culture of Needlework and Sewing, and helped influence her interest in the archaeology of food and foodways. Like all of us, Chesapeake historical archaeology is at a different place than it was in the 1970s. Then it was literally one of the centers of the archaeological universe. The emergence of Atlantic world history as a framework for understanding the early modern world soon rendered the Chesapeake into a bit of a backwater. An interesting backwater, to be sure, but a backwater still. The two of us have jobs we love as we get to study this backwater. Vestiges of old ways, however, still linger. Status as measured by positions held in the region suggests that things are changing, but not nearly as fast as they should, and certainly not in a way that reflects the U.S. population categories in terms of diversity. If it remains a somewhat hard nut to crack, imagine what it was like more than 40 years ago when a young, sharp woman arrived on the scene. Mary's experiences in the Chesapeake region surely shaped the supporter and mentor she was to become. Maybe Mary did not need to recall those years publicly to know how critically important mentoring is to career development. Thank you very much.